is the Financially Free Journey podcast, and I am your host, Courtney Dyer. And if you're new to this podcast, you have just joined the financial independence movement, where you're going to learn how to strengthen and flex your money muscles. This podcast aims to dispel the seemingly complex topics of debt, budgeting, investing, and retiring early. But before we get into today's episode, I want to give a quick shout out to this week's review winner, Rose Oakley. And she wrote, so I have been in search of a podcast that discuss how to be better with personal finances. I'm an entrepreneur and a recent college grad, and this podcast honestly makes me feel way more knowledgeable than I was before I started listening. Thank you so much, Rose Oakley, for listening and sharing your takeaways from the podcast. After years in the financial industry, I realized that as a society, we do not put enough of an emphasis on learning about personal finances and honestly, how to make smart money decisions. This has been my number one motivator personally for making this show, and I want to share this knowledge with all of you. So today's episode, we are going to be building off of last week's episode. And if you haven't listened to episode 5, make sure that you pause this episode, go back and listen to episode 5, and then come back and finish this one. Today, we're going to be discussing 7 tips to help you stop impulse buying. So we've all been there, right? You see something in the store that you want and you get this momentary thrill as you think about buying it. You can't wait to get it home, try it out, and you may even start to rationalize the purchase to yourself, telling yourself all the different ways that this item is going to positively impact your life and make things 100% better. But we know the truth is, this is something you definitely didn't need, and it's not even something you considered buying before you went to the store that day. The impulse purchase is one of the biggest reasons why many people fall short of their savings goals, and it slowly adds up over time and can totally derail you from the goals that you've set that's going to bring you true happiness. So not only is impulse buying hard on your bank account in the short term, but it is almost just as bad or worse on your long-term goals, and it's like a bad habit, like smoking. It's hard to quit and in the future because you've now developed a strong thought pattern that's going to prevent you from developing good financial practices in the long run. So you need to first and foremost become aware of your impulse spending patterns. Everybody is triggered differently and by a specific emotion. If you're not sure how to identify your triggers, go back to episode 2. It's called Budgeting for Beginners. And in that episode, we discuss how to identify your current spending patterns, which is directly going to connect to today's episode. But you may be wondering, what is impulse buying exactly? This phrase was actually coined in the 1950s, and it's an important phenomenon for researchers when it comes to consumer behavior and retail shopping. Multi-billion-dollar industries have been built on the back of impulse shoppers, which is a self-identified total of 77% of all people who shop. So when you walk into a retail store, they've designed their store to entice your impulsive nature by creating paths for you to follow, strategically placing things at eye level, placing impulse items around those high demand items, and creating, of course, urgency with quote unquote limited time offers and sales. And we know the list goes on and on, right? But we know that many people have a temporary high when they go shopping and they buy something new, and experiencing this can actually release dopamine into your brain, which can cause you to feel temporarily high. So keeping all of this in mind, impulse, the average U.S. consumer spends $5,400 a year on impulse purchases. The top 5 culprits when it comes to impulse buys is food at 71%, eating out, right? Clothing at 53%, household items at 33%, and shoes at 28%, and then groceries at 29%. So on top of that, 85% of consumers said that their impulse purchase was in response to taking advantage of that quote unquote deal or discount. So now that you've covered what impulse buying is and why we do it, let's go over the ways to avoid it. And here's my top 7 tips on how to avoid impulse buying. Okay, number 1, create a waiting period and a dollar limit before an impulse buy. So let me give you an example. You set a limit of anything that you purchase over $50. You have to wait a minimum waiting period. Let's pretend like it's 24 hours before buying it. Typically, within that 24 hours, that emotion is going to die down and you're going to have to think about the purchase more rationally. So do you even really need it or want it at that point? So make sure you stick to a waiting period, whether it's 24 hours or a week or a month. You decide on that waiting period and the dollar limit associated with that. Okay, number 2, always go shopping with a list. I know this isn't new information, but if something is not on your predetermined list, do not buy it. It really is that simple. Create a strict list before you go shopping and limit it to the things that you need. And bonus tip, if the service is available near you, place your grocery order online or even schedule it for delivery or pickup. You will completely avoid the temptation altogether. So that's always a key thing. Go shopping with a list. And if you don't even have to go into the store, that's even better, right? Number 3, unsubscribe to newsletters and sales emails from retailers and your favorite brands. This is a big one, guys. Almost 80% of young consumers do their impulse shopping online. Don't make it harder on yourself by having your favorite shops and brands sending you emails nonstop telling you about their current amazing deal and the things that you can't miss out on. And bonus tip on that, online retailers advertise products to you based off of products that you've researched online, you've Googled it, or you've bought it in the past. So the next time you see an ad when you're scrolling through your social media, hide the ad or report it or have it removed from your feed. Again, removing temptation is the name of the game here. So tip number 4, avoid going to shopping areas for fun. Have you ever heard of the phrase quote unquote retail therapy? This is a very dangerous mindset and it develops bad thought patterns when it comes to how you associate shopping with your emotions. So make sure that you avoid those shopping areas when you're bored, sad, happy, or stressed, because impulse purchases capitalize on you making that purchase based off of your emotions. Tip number 5, do not go shopping with credit cards. This can also be a very dangerous mindset because you can develop the I'll worry about it later mentality. Tip number 6, make sure you do your research. So let's say you're dead set on making a purchase that was sparked by impulse. Make sure that you do your research on the product during that established waiting period. Remember, tip number 1, you're going to most likely find the product cheaper online, and you're also going to be able to read reviews about the product to see if it is quality and worth you making that purchase. Final tip number 7, find free ways to reward yourself. Impulse shopping in general is sometimes viewed as a way to reward ourselves due to our consumerism society. So change your thinking and find free ways to reward yourself that are more satisfying. Some great examples of that is taking a bath, taking a day off work, maybe a stay-at-home movie night, game night with your friends, going for a hike, take that long nap you've been wanting, bake your favorite food or eat your favorite meal without guilt. Do something that makes you happy, but make sure that you choose something that truly motivates you so you don't undermine your goal of saving money for early retirement. So I hope that these tips and today's episode has inspired you to think about your purchasing patterns and given you ways to take action and make that change that you want in your life. So thank you again for listening to the Financially Free Journey podcast. Until next time.